Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
I strongly urge you to pay attention, pay real close attention to what you're going to hear in the next 35 to 40 minutes. Now, I asked today on social media, did you know that the European Union was the brainchild of the very same people who planned for a post-Second World War Europe under the Nazis? Did you know that? I was sent a terrific book last week called The Nazi Roots of the Brussels EU. And it was compiled by 4 authors: Paul Anthony Taylor, Alexandra Niedzwiecki, Matthias Rass, and August Kowalczyk. It's outstanding. It's a book that every single person in this country should have in their hands before June 23rd to let them know, or to give them the opportunity to find out what the European Union is really all about and where it came from. My first guest is a businessman. He's an entrepreneur. As I mentioned earlier on, he is a volunteer, and he has been for some time, at the Dr. Rass Health Foundation. He's the sole distributor of what I believe is a sensational but a brilliant book, The Nazi Roots of the Brussels EU. He joins us on the line now. Derek Hyde, welcome to the programme. How are you?
Very good, Richie. I hope that life has been treating you well also.
It's been treating me pretty good. I was mentioning earlier on, we've had 2 kind of early summer days, I would say, here in Manchester. The country is awash in sunshine, Derek, so all is good. Everybody's in good form up here. This is fantastic, this book. It's vital. You're going to start off, I've got a couple of questions for you, but you're going to kick off with a really appropriate, a really apt quote from George Santeo. Give it to us.
Yes. From his words are, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
And it's never been more appropriate for what we're going to talk about now. And as well as those who don't remember, and those who are old enough to remember how the European Union came to be, there are those, and unfortunately, Derek, I believe in the majority, there are those in the majority who have no idea about it. I want you to explain for us straight off the bat how those who I mentioned, how those who were planning for a Nazi-controlled Europe, how those same people who sponsored that and who wanted that, how they came to be the architects of the European project.
Yes, I'll be very pleased to do that. But could I make mention of the 4 authors? Because I'd like to give them some credit.
Well, I did mention them in the introduction. I mentioned them by name. And we can, of course, but feel free, Derek, go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Yes, Paul Anthony Taylor, just to give you a little bit of background, foundation director. He's the executive director of the foundation. His background is in the music industry. He's plays with the likes of, as a session musician, with Paul McCartney and the likes, quite a number of well-known people. Then we have Alexandra Niedzwiecki. She's the head of research at the Foundation's research facility in America, which is actually Santa Barbara in California. Then we have Matthias Raff. He is the founder of the Dr. Raff Foundation, a giant amongst men, in my view, a German that has blown the whistle on the Nazi roots. Being a German, I think that's quite apt. And lastly, of course, we have August, who was a survivor of the Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz. He was very lucky that he was able to escape after about a year of being incarcerated. So that's just a brief introduction of the 4 authors concerned.
Brilliant. August's story is a fascinating story. I've been reading the book, been reading it for most of the last few days. Let's jump straight in. 24 past the hour. We've got 35 minutes from here, and they're going to disappear on us. Derek, those who planned for the Nazi-controlled Europe after the war came to be the architects of the European project. Who are these people? Why did they support the Nazis, and why were the same people behind the First World War? And explain then how the European project is a result of the failure to
Right.
bring about control because of the wars. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, we need to look at the financial interest groups, right? I think this is very important. And then I'll come on to one of the main architects of the creation of the Brussels EU, who also became the first commissioner, which was Walter Holstein, right? But before we get into that one, I think we need to look at who were the funders behind all of this, who were the money, because there's a saying, you need to follow the money, right? Very important. We need to look at who sponsored it and what did they have to gain from it. The sponsors of this was a huge conglomerate called IG Farben, a German company that was at that time the biggest petro-pharmaceutical company in the world, closely followed by the Rockefeller Foundation in the United States of America. What's interesting here is that these were the main funders of World War II. And what is interesting here is that AG Farben had shares in the Rockefeller setup in the US, and Rockefeller had shares of similar value in IG Farben in Germany.
Now, IG Farben was a cartel which was made up of massive companies like Bayer, like BASF, like Hoist, and many others. Massive company, right?
Massive.
Yeah.
What's interesting is if we look at this, and this is very important to look at the money. This is the money side of it. If we look at this setup, which is the petrochemical and the pharmaceutical industry, if we look at it today, not only is it a lot bigger than it was during the time when they were carrying out, this globalization to take over the world, which was through first they tried it with World War One, that failed. Second attempt was World War Two. That also failed. Fortunately, it failed.
They funded the Nazis. Now, this is seriously important. This cartel, this IG Farben cartel of massive, wealthiest companies in the world, and the Rockefellers, they wanted the Nazis to succeed, didn't they?
They funded it.
Of course, that's right. Yeah.
It directly funded the Nazi. In fact, let me just give you a brief of just how incredible this is. It reads like a fictional novel, and in fact, that it defies belief actually. But the reality is the reality, and of course, this is well documented. It's in the historic archives. For anybody that wishes to go and find it, it's there for all to see. So it's not up for debate. It literally is there for anybody that cares to take the time to do so. But the point is that if we actually look at the baseline was this nasty creature by the name of Hitler, right? This very nasty individual. And if we look how World War II came into being, it was through the black shirts in Germany, and they were funded by AG Farben. What actually happened was that they had a meeting with Hitler, which is AG Farben, the biggest petro-pharmaceutical conglomerate in the world at that time. They saw in him great promise because he was exactly the villain that they needed to carry out the conquest, not just of Europe, but of the world. It was world conquest. World War I and World War II was for world conquest, right? And they saw in him the very man, the very villain, the very criminal mind that they needed to carry out their dastardly deeds, which was world control. And of course, what they did, they had a meeting with Hitler. This is well documented. They had a meeting with Hitler, and they said to him, we have the means to bring you into office. And if you do so, then we want this, and what we want to do is to take over the world, and we want the spoils of the world, right? Now, to give you an idea just how this all fits together, one of their sister companies is called AG Auschwitz. Where does that name sound familiar?
Yeah.
In fact, the first concentration camp in Poland was Auschwitz, where August was actually incarcerated, right, for a period. Absolutely hell on earth. It's unspeakable the crimes that were carried out there. the figure is for mass murder on this sort of scale. They've talked about figures in the tune of around about 8 million people. Well, I think that's an understatement. From my own research, I think we could quite easily double that figure. But in terms of the world numbers of people which have lost their lives through corrupt governments around the world, and we're seeing that both here at home and also abroad, and all the countries which are not currently being bombed, like Syria, previously Libya, and then prior to that Iraq, are countries which have become compliant. And the reason why they become compliant is because the system no longer serves the people. And that's quite evident. The systems both here in the UK and America and Australia and Canada and all these countries, France, Germany, etc., goes on and on and on, they have literally become internalized. Because what's happened is the big financial interest groups have taken over the system. And what you find is that these politicians are brought into power by the money. They, like, for example, you've got the Rockefellers, but they then fall very much into the background in this scenario. Well, who comes into the spotlight now, of course, is the Rothschilds.
And the Warburgs and the Oppenheimers and the other 8 families of the Federal Reserve, yeah. Can we go back to Hitler now? Can we go back to Hitler for a minute? Because we're 29 minutes to the top of the hour, and our time is going to... I told you this today, but I'll be asking you back on again before the referendum. But I want to go back to Hitler. These guys wanted to set a madman loose on the world so that they could ultimately have the spoils of war, that they could have access to every raw material, to every bit of natural wealth in the world. These are lunatics now. These are the Rockefellers. These are the IG Farben cartel.
Right.
Now,
that's right.
they didn't succeed. I'm being asked to ask you a brilliant question, by the way. I told you we'd get hammered on Twitter and on email.
Yes, of course.
Did when General Smedley Butler, the US decorated general, when he blew the whistle on the fact that industrialists were planning to overthrow Franklin D. Roosevelt in America in 1933. Is this all connected to what was going on at the time?
Absolutely. This has been going on even long before that. This is a continuation of what I call the bloodlines.
Yeah.
Right. The bloodlines are, of course, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and there's loads of spin-offs from this. There's they seem to have sort of, it's like a spider's web. It covers the whole of the globe, right? And it's been going on for an awfully long time. It's been going on long before I even before I was even, setting step on this planet. Long before I came here, it's been a continuation of a long-term plan. And you think, well, how can that be? Surely that cannot be. And the reason, what it is, the way this plays out, is the bloodline passes it on to their children, right? So basically, what they've drawn up a game plan, and it's been going on for hundreds of years. I've gone back. I'll give you an example, Richie. And I don't want to get away from these main points here, but I've gone back to a time of our distant past, which is the time of Charles I, right? It's 5 centuries ago now that took place, and bringing us right up to date. And what happened was that when Oliver Cromwell succeeded during the Civil War here in England, right? He was a parliamentarian, and what he said was in the House, and this is in the lower house, in the chamber, he said that the Commons no longer serves the people, and as a result of that, the chamber he closed Parliament. This is a fact.
That's right. 5 centuries ago. You're right. You're talking to a history graduate. You're absolutely spot on. Yeah.
Yeah. 5 centuries ago, Parliament was closed because it no longer serves the people. Right. Now, what it meant was that all the MPs at that time were kicked out of office. They were not allowed to stand, and new blood was brought in. The problem is, here we are 5 centuries later, back where we were at the time of Oliver Cromwell, because the financial interest groups have infiltrated the parliamentary system, and they have taken control of the parliamentary systems, not just here in the UK, right, but also all around the world. America was the turning point. Let me tell you where the money started, really, where the turning point of World War One and World War Two started. It was it was after 1913. Do you know what happened in 1913?
Well, a lot of things, but I'm not sure where you're going, but go ahead.
Right. Well, in 1913, what happened was the late President Woodrow Wilson had a meeting with, at that time, at least three families. One was Rothschild, one was Rockefeller, and I think the other one was Morgan, going from memory. Could be held to account on that. But anyway, three families involved. They went to Woodrow Wilson. This defies belief. Prior to that, the money in the US was printed by the US Treasury.
That's right. We're talking about the setting up of the Federal Reserve here, signed into law by Woodrow Wilson. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. And then in 1913, they succeeded in doing that. Unbelievably, the money was given to these three families.
And of course, when Wilson left office, Wilson bemoaned. Well, he didn't bemoan. He went as far as saying that it was one of the worst decisions ever made by any president.
That's correct. And in fact, you can go on YouTube, and he's making an address to. This is Woodrow Wilson making an address to the people of America, apologising for being duped. Now, he must think we're naive. He wasn't duped. He was part of the system, right? He wasn't duped. But he's trying to tell us that he was fooled. Well, I think you've got to be very naive to be falling for that one. Quite clearly, he's trying to cover his tracks after the event, apologising to the people for handing over the money. Unfortunately, what's happened since then, of course, we've seen World War II, which is around about the year 1918, and then Second World War, that failed. Second World War was 1939 to 1945. Now, prior to the handing over of the money, and this is very important because this is really the unfolding of the big guns coming out now. The reason why that's so important and tying up with the Brussels EU is because when they took control of the money, the whole game changed. And in fact, prior to 1913, the only events we saw in terms of if we look at the money, we didn't see these big swings, the bear markets, the bull markets, and the bear markets. The only time that the American dollar actually swung was during the Civil War in America. But prior to that, the currency was relatively stable, right? There wasn't, it wasn't being manipulated. As soon as these villains got control of the money, of course, that all changed. And then we saw, as a result of that, World War One, which was their attempt at world conquest,
which failed.
Which failed. And then, of course, the second attempt was in 1939 to.
Just having a bit of difficulty with Derek's line there. I apologise for that. It does happen. I'm going to try and disconnect him and reconnect with him while I'm chatting with you. This is serious stuff here, folks. This book, and there are not many copies of this. There really aren't. It's The Nazi Roots of the Brussels EU, produced by the Dr. Rass Health Foundation. And it's an absolutely fantastic book, packed full of facts to support this particular story. How the European Union, as we know it today, came to be. Derek, we just we had a bit of a connection issue there, but I'm hoping, fingers crossed, we're back. You're in the room, and we can carry on.
Hear me okay, Richie?
Just about. I'm going to give it another few seconds. We'll see does it stabilise. If it doesn't, I'm going to go to the landline. It does sometimes happen with Skype, Derek. But welcome back. I've just mentioned the name of the book again. We're coming up now at this point to talking about we've gotten to the end of the Second World War. They failed again. They failed for the second time to bring about the unity through tyranny, through through Hitler. And here we are now, when they've basically decided to create, by seemingly more peaceful means, the United States of Europe, or the European Union as we know it. Pick it up from there, Derek.
Yes, I'm very, very pleased to do so. This is the third attempt at world conquest. They they're quite clever people. We have to give them credit. They have realised that the using the force of arms didn't work. It didn't work in World War One. It didn't work in World War Two. Having said that, we are seeing the force of arms with other skirmishes, which are more localised. You could call them more localised skirmishes, particularly in Africa, right? Which is obviously the nations we've previously covered, which is Iraq and so on. But basically, this is the third attempt at world conquest. And the way they've done this is through various measures, in particular the European Union. In fact, what we saw was the United Nations is part of this. The United Nations was the first leg of this journey for world conquest. And if you look at it very closely, what you notice is that the European Union is almost a replica of that. Not quite. There's obviously there's certain differences, but if you look at the overall concept, the concept is exactly the same, right? And the European Union is actually the foundation for the African Union, which has now been set up, and various other unions. And then, of course, we've got the Asian Union coming along, right? What's interesting about this, it's based around what's called the Enabling Act. Can you hear me, Richie?
Loud and clear, Derek. Yeah, you've got my attention. Go ahead. Talking about the Enabling Act. Go ahead.
The Enabling Act. Well, a guy called Holstein, which was the lawyer for the Nazi Party, brought about what was called the Enabling Act. The Enabling Act, interestingly enough, is basically the Lisbon Treaty, which was passed a few years ago, and it's virtually a duplication, right? Exactly the same. It's exactly the same, and what it is, it's all part of this, this criminal activity for world dominance. So, in other words, it's structured in such a way that they take control.
What we have now, when we look at what is the European Union today. I mean, you mentioned Holstein. He was the first president of the European Union Commission. All of this was funded from the outset by the Rothschilds, JP Morgan, and the central banks, right? And I want to jump forwards and backwards at the same time, because I want to talk about what the European. So this is why it was set up. It was set up to be the beginnings of a one world government, effectively, to centralise power. No doubt about that, right? To concentrate the wealth of the world into the hands of these bloodlines, these families. This is an absolute fact. This is undisputed. What we have today, which is never mentioned on the media, it sickens me. You get Nigel Farage will occasionally go down this road, but nobody else will. And that's, of course, why they want to control the vote leave side. That's why Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and Chris Grayling, these horrible characters, are voting or appear to want us to vote leave, because none of these guys will ever dig down into what's really going on with the European Union. I want you to talk about the Commission headquarters. I want you to talk about the 50,000 bureaucrats making executive decisions and draft legislation, because people believe, Derek, that the 750 or 760 members of the EU Parliament elected in Cork, in Waterford, in London, in Lisbon, all these other cities around Europe, people want to believe that these men and women are making decisions in Europe, but they're not. Do us a favour. Describe for us the way the apparatus of the European Union works within Brussels, how it runs, who runs it and how.
Yeah, it's very simple. Again, you've got to give these guys credit, where credit's due. Hang on, we've got an internet connection problem. Can you hear me?
I can, but you're scratchy. I might just call you on the landline. How about that?
You sure?
Yeah, I'm going to call you on the landline because it is jumping in and out and this is too serious. Derek, I'll call you back in 2 minutes. I'm going to give Derek a call on his landline. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to waste time by taking music. I'm going to call him as I'm speaking with you because I can do that sort of thing, It's great on live radio. Right, so his number was, and I've got it here. It's terrible when that happens, isn't it? It depends on people's internet connection. You think in 2016 we'd all have the super fast broadband in the United Kingdom, but we don't all have the super fast broadband. I do. I've got 200 meg speed at the studio and ridiculous upload speeds, but not everybody else has. I'm carrying the 2 now and dividing it by 3. There, 1 7. And I think I have the number. So I'm going to give him a quick call there. You're with the Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com. It's 15 minutes to the top of the hour. Derek Hyde is on with us, and we're talking about the Nazi roots of the Brussels EU. That's a book. We'll give you loads and loads and loads of links on Twitter as to where to find out and where to verify all of this information. Derek, are we back in the room?
Right.
That's
can you hear me okay, Richie?
Derek, I can hear you loud and clear, and we're not going to have the connection problems. That's brilliant. You were just about to describe the 50,000 unelected bureaucrats who make the decisions in Europe as opposed to the members of the EU Parliament whom we vote for. Nothing is more vital than people understanding this. Go ahead, explain this to us.
Yes. First of all, I want to give credit to these villains because they've been quite clever in the way this has been set up. Because on the face of it, it appears to be democratic. It appears to be that we elect people called MEPs, members of the European Parliament, and on the face of it, it all looks very nice because what you've got is you have the Parliament buildings both in Strasbourg and in Brussels, where these members that you talk about actually sit around and we see them on the television and they're debating or appear to be debating, and then the hands go up. But what you have to understand is how this is structured. The real power is actually in the hands of unelected bureaucrats. These are the people you've just referred to, 54,000 people.
54,000 people. Is that where the £55 million a day goes to pay these lunatics?
We have to wonder, don't we? Because the problem is that for... is it over 10, 12 years or 15 years? I can't remember what the number is now, but the auditors have failed to sign off the accounts, or refused, I should say, to sign off the accounts of the European Union, because this 54 million, is it a day, that's going into this black hole?
Yeah, that's right.
European Union is totally unaccounted for, quite literally. They don't know where the money's going. So really, in that respect, we're paying in £54 million, and you have to ask who would do that? Who would literally just hand over £54 million, and there's no answers as to where the money is actually being spent. It just defies belief, but that's exactly what we're dealing with, because the auditors, the facts of the matter is that the auditors of the European Union have absolutely refused each year, every time it comes up for audit, have refused to sign off the accounts.
That's tyrannical. There isn't anything more unethical, I would say, tyrannical than that. Are you describing to me, then, that these industrialists, these bloodlines, these families, they're basically instructing the European Commission bureaucrats?
Yes.
So they tell them what they want. Those guys... Or those guys and girls, those men and women, they then instruct the European Union Parliament and the MEPs, and it basically gets signed into law. That's how it works.
Not quite, no. Yes, basically what happens is that your MEPs, for example, are elected by each country obviously has elections like we have here in the UK. And then obviously the constituents decide on who those members will be to represent them in the European Parliament. And of course, we have some good guys in there, we have some bad guys in there, there are some people in there which are blowing the whistle, like Daniel Hannan, for example. He's been a clear advocate of, coming out. And what's interesting about that, of course, is that by coming out, if we came out, he would become unemployed. So it's not in his interest to actually vote for coming out. But in the main, of course, most of them are on what I call a gravy train. They get paid a huge salary, huge expense account, at our expense. And, it's one big jolly. I see it as one big jolly. So, of course, there's a big incentive for these guys and girls to actually stay in the club. That some of them have even gone in with good intentions initially, but they very quickly become corrupted because obviously the money is free flowing. And, they're doing very nicely on it, thank you very much. And, of course, they're getting very fat on it as a result.
Derek, let me do a quick recap. It's 11 minutes to the top of the hour. If you're just joining the programme, folks, Derek Hyde is on the line from the Dr. Rath Health Foundation. He's volunteered for that organisation for many years. He's the sole distributor of the terrific book, The Nazi Roots of the Brussels EU. He's on the line to me now. What we've been talking about is how a group of wealthy industrialists and private bankers, we're talking about a tiny amount of people. This is what people can't get their head round. We're talking about the IG Farben cartel, Bayer, Bass, Hoechst and others, basically planning through the First and Second World War to take over the world effectively, to take over the natural resources of the planet through whatever means. Didn't succeed. Following World War II, well, the best thing we better do is to form a sovereign, well, not a sovereign, but to form a United States of Europe. Do it that way. Centralise power and do that elsewhere around the world, as Derek has described, because by doing that, we then get to own everything. Derek, the tweets and the emails are flying in. Where does the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership come into this, the TTIP agreement, which ultimately cedes, I would say, absolutely hands control over all of our lives to corporate interests? Right.
Go ahead. Here's the challenges that we're now faced with that agreement. If, for example, that we stay in the European Union, then that is the end of the National Health Service. Because under that agreement, that we have to literally sell it off, right? So we're going to be told to sell it. In fact, that's basically in the agreement. That's in the TPIP agreement. A sovereign country is only a sovereign country if it has control of its money, and only if it has control of its resources. If it gives up that money and if it gives up its resources, it no longer has any bargaining power. It cannot control its destiny. It's only through the money that you can control your destiny, and they know that, right? So, of course, TPIP is actually a continuation of that process of stealing the wealth of this country, and they've already done it elsewhere. We've seen it in Greece. Just look at Greece. Look at the state Greece is in, right? That's where they're taking us. Right?
Not to mention Italy, Portugal, Spain, the Republic of Ireland. They could be here all day.
Exactly, and all those other countries. They're in dire straits. Some of these countries. I think Greece is probably the worst out of the bunch at the moment. But that's just the beginning of it. If you think that that's the end, this is just the beginning. We're just at the beginning of this robbery. It's a huge robbery of assets and money, and in fact, it was estimated that. Wait for this one. 1/3 of our you're not going to believe this. 1/3 of our disposable income. Guess who gets it? The cartel. This cartel. They get it.
Tell me this. When we go back to the very early beginnings of the European Union, we know all about Operation Paperclip, where some of the worst of the Nazis, got jobs in weapons research programs in America and elsewhere.
That's right.
How many of them that were part of the Third Reich ended up in working in the bureaucratic corridors of Europe in the late 40s and early 50s? Do we know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, the chief architect here, of course, is Walter Holstein. He was the lawyer, the Nazi lawyer. What's interesting is that after W2, there was obviously the Nuremberg war, the court put in session, for the war crimes carried out by these individuals. Walter Holstein suddenly ended up with amnesia. He couldn't remember anything. Yeah. And as a result of that, he got off scot-free. But he was one of the key. He was the key architect of this. He was the chief money man. He was the lawyer running a great deal of the show. And of course, what happened was at the end of W2, he was never brought to book. I think it was a travesty. Actually, I've even said this. I think that the Nuremberg trials, in my view, this is just purely my view, I think it was a bit of a whitewash. On the face of it, it looks like justice was done, but real justice, in fact, even Dr. Raff has agreed with this one, that real justice was never done, because the real perpetrators, particularly the bloodline families, such as the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, these are the people behind the curtain that are actually running the whole show, were never brought to account. These families were never brought to account. And of course, Holstein was never brought to account. So, and this is Puppet Man number one. And of course, he went on from there to then form the European Union. He was the master of the European Union. He was the chief architect. And what's interesting was that he had a meeting with Edward Heath at Chequers, right? And there was many meetings that took place at Chequers with Holstein, number one criminal. So we can be left no doubt as to where the money was. The money was coming from the bloodline families, from these people.
They've always owned the media, Derek, so there's no way that anybody was ever going to be told about this. So you go back to the 1940s and 1950s. The Wall Street Journal, the Times of London, the Irish Times, Der Spiegel, none of these newspapers gave a shit because they're owned by these people.
I'd like to come in.
Go ahead. We've got now about 6-7 minutes left, and I want to talk about you giving the book to parliamentarians in the recent past, which is important, and the response you did or didn't get from that. But talk about the complicity of the media in making sure that this basically progressed from stage to stage with no scrutiny whatsoever.
That's correct. And the reason being is because these families actually own the media. They own the politicians. They own the whole system. That's why they've got away with it. There is nothing at the moment, stopping their march for world domination. It is a continuation. And they're doing extremely well, thank you very much. There's nobody stopping them because, of course, we haven't got a parliament here that is actually active in our interest. They're actually paid servants of these people. In fact, I call them fifth columnists. These people, some of them, out of the 652 MPs, I'll just tell you this, are basically compliant. They are compliant to their wishes because what they do is they just sign everything off.
They know, of course, Derek. Our listeners will be thinking, some of these people, they're in it for the money. They don't know. They do know. They do know. They know the origins of this,
Of course they know. And what they've done, in my view, is that they have sold their souls, and they don't realise what a heavy price these people are going to pay. They're going to pay, if not in this life, they might think this is a one-stop shop. Well, they're very naive if they think that, because if they don't pay for it in this lifetime, they will certainly pay for it in the next one.
Derek Hyde is on the line, folks. I've just tweeted out a number of websites that Derek sent to me today where you can find out this information. We're talking about a book which is absolutely vital reading, The Nazi Roots of the Brussels European Union. What you always wanted to know about the European Union, the Brussels EU, but nobody dared to tell you. This is credible, verifiable information. I know this to be true. I know it instinctively, and I know it because I researched it, and I've told you before, I'm a history graduate. This is all true, every single word of it. Derek, talk to us about your attempts to send, well, not your attempts to, because you did send the book to a number of high-profile politicians, including Jeremy Corbyn, the current leader of the Labour Party, who allegedly is very much anti the European Union, although he's backed remaining within the European Union, probably because of pressures from within his party. What responses have you gotten from those you've sent the book to?
A wall of silence.
Nothing.
Absolutely zero. What's interesting is that it was agreed over 2 years ago. I can give exact dates when these were sent out because I have a record of it. It was decided, I believe it was Dr. Rath, I may be wrong on this one, but I think it was the great man himself, Dr. Rath, that thought it would be a good idea that the book should be sent out to those people that either had still had a reasonably open mind that maybe, would be interested in finding out the real facts, or those people which were on side. Now, out of the 652 MPs that were in office at that time, there was only 100. Wait for it. There was only 120 were considered for receiving the copy of the book, which tells you something in itself,
doesn't it?
Doesn't it? Now, one of those was Corbyn, right? And so therefore, he cannot plead ignorance that he does not know on the origins of the EU. He knows exactly what the EU is. He knows that it's criminal. The word that I use, what we are facing today, and this is the word that I use, is industrialised gangsterism.
Yeah.
And the reason why I use that word is that they tried it with the conquest at W1. They failed through the force of arms. They tried it at W2. Force of arms also failed. But what we're seeing today is that they are using exactly the same. Well, they're using a two-pronged attack. One is through the pen, signing treaties, and secondly through force of arms. And the force of arms we're talking about here is currently Syria. Prior to that was Libya. Prior to that was Iraq, right? We've got tyrants, for example, Saudi Arabia, the most vile people on planet Earth, the most vile villains on planet Earth. These people are absolutely evil beyond imagination. And ISIS is a creation of these people with our governments, also our money, our taxpayer money, is going into this system to actually, to fight these dirty wars, right? So what we're seeing is a two-pronged attack, which is through the pen, signing of treaties, and a continuation of the war machine on the other side of it. And it just marches on.
Derek, we're going to leave it there for now, my friend. It's a minute past the hour. We didn't take news so that I could hear more from you. Can you tell us quickly before you go, where can people get the Nazi roots of the Brussels EU? I know they're a bit like gold dust at the moment. Are there more going to be printed, Derek?
Yes. Oh, yes, there will be. But at the moment, there is a limited number of these still available. We are in discussions at the moment about finding, to bring it to redo it. But at the moment, there is only limited quantities in the British language. It's now in 12 languages. This was actually the first edition, and since then, it's gone on to be published in many other languages. But there is a limited number of these, very limited number. And these can be found on the first one on that list that I gave you this afternoon, which is called the Reject EU site. If you go on there, there's a button on there where you can actually, first of all, review it. First of all, you can go on the site and find out what it's all about. And then if you wish to order a copy, you can do so by going and ordering a copy from there.
Let me just give... I've already tweeted this out, but I'm going to do it now. It's www.reject-EU.co.uk, and I've already tweeted that out there. My friend, we're going to do a full programme, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to get one or two other speakers as well. We're going to have a big show maybe the week before or a few days before the referendum itself, and I want you to come back on. Vital work, Derek. Congratulations on it, and come back again.
Can I just clarify on that web address you're giving out? Because I think it's .org, actually.
What did I say? Did I say .eu or .com?
.uk. I think it's .org.
Let's see. I'm reading from the book and it says .co.uk, but the email you sent me might say something different. I'll clarify it, Derek, and I'll clarify it when I come back from the break. Thanks for coming on. Really loved it. Vital stuff. The Nazi roots of the Brussels EU. Come back again just before the referendum and we'll do another one of these. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richie.
Bye for now. Derek Hyde on the line to us there. I will confirm that. I know Claire is listening. Claire, I think it is actually .co.uk. Find it for me and retweet it there. Claire, if you don't mind. Loads of interest. Absolutely massive amounts of interest in this. Tweets and emails. It's new to a lot of people, this. You know, how the European Union came to be, why it came to be, the links to the First and Second World War and the links to the attempts to overthrow Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933, as was revealed by General Smedley Butler. It's been planned for hundreds of years, and it's what a lot of people can't get their heads around. Vital stuff.